Moreover, these new ways of thinking and values have been incorporated in international treaties and conventions that are intended to guide government on our pursuit to establish equitable and properly functional societies. As a domestic worker, there is the ILO Convention 189 that sets the standards that government must follow in addressing the rights of domestic workers, our rights. We are therefore emboldened by this new development in our modern world to put forward our agenda, which we believe is in keeping with the values of human dignity we share. It is time to recognize domestic work as real and essential work for the regular functioning of society. The practice of considering domestic work as unpaid labor borne primarily by the woman of the household that has existed for so long must be cast into the dustbin of history. Persons who perform the work should be compensated properly, including all the social protections enjoyed by workers in other sectors. As a measure for gender equality, the domestic workers enable the women of the household the freedom to pursue the career and achieve a better work and life balance. It is time for migrants who are engaged in this type of essential work to be given the recognition and protection enjoyed by workers in other sectors. They often work in shadows, invisible to our official society and visible only to their employers. Many of them have no documents which subject for their life of insecurity and precarity. We shall work with trade unions, women's organizations, migrants organizations, human rights advocates, church group, academics, politicians, employers, and all people in goodwill in order to achieve our goal. Our long-term goals are, first, for domestic work in general, whether performed by migrants or citizens, to be recognized as real work, like any other, with the concomitant obligations of granting the standard labor rights and social protection due to workers. And secondly, for migrants to be given equal opportunity with their host country counterparts to have access to employment in this sector with accompanying rights based on an enlightened immigration policy. To achieve this goal, we will engage policymakers at all levels of government. We're also engaging the help of influential organizations and personalities and the support of general public. Our immediate goals. We are fully aware that the achievement of our long-term goals will require a long, complicated political process. Thus, we have set ourselves the following immediate goals that may be feasible in the short term, even if we engage in the struggle of our long-term goals. These immediate goals will have us held at the minimum of more tolerant existence. First, access to bank account. More and more, a bank account is needed to have access to goods and services, just to be able to stay alive and move around. In Dutch practice, undocumented, traveling, undocumented migrants are barred from these basic needs. This is wrong. There is a European Union directive which obliges member states to make a basic payment account accessible to all residents of Europe, regardless of their immigration status, to enable them full participation in society. Number two, access to medical and dental services. There are hospitals that provide medical care even to undocumented migrants as a form of social care. There are also doctors and dentists, either as member of organization or as individual, who offer medical and dental services pro bono or at nominal cost. What is needed is to make the information known to undocumented migrants who are often not aware of these or else are hesitant to make use of these services for fear of adverse consequences, action required of. And third, a fair and mutual beneficial contract. In cooperation with sympathetic employers, we shall try to work out a fair and mutual beneficial contract that can be agreed upon between the employer and the domestic worker. We can propagate the best practices among employers who are willing to join us in this project. And fourth, a node fund. We shall try to set up a node funds for emergencies migrant domestic workers have to provide for their basic assistance, and what they can save, they often send to their families in their home countries. When emergency strikes, they are ill prepared to cope. Thus, the need for node funds. And last but not the least, the identification card. Whether it was city identification card or a trade union card, an ID card can come handy for police or immigration control as a requirement to establish identity to have access to some services. That's it. Thank you.
Woo. I actually wrote two major pointers about the presentation that you just said about the goals of the Union of Domestic Workers. And but before we move to the panel discussion, I just want to present our three other speakers for tonight. And let me give you Jessica Van Rottenberg, Policy Advisor for FNV. She could not join us here in the studio, so you could see her there. And also joining us tonight is Ms. Tesselche de la of Radboud University in Nijmegen, an expert on European migration law, and Fatima Arbay, researcher and advisor at the Ombudsman Metropole Amsterdam. Before we do the panel discussion, I also want to acknowledge the presence of our brave migrant domestic workers who are with us today, and also some people from the academe, and also from the Amsterdam City Rights, and some people here I know traveled all the way from Den Haag and Rotterdam just to be with us here tonight. All right, so yes. Okay, moving on. As I noted from based on Joy's presentation a while ago, there are two goals of the Union of the Migrant Domestic Workers, and that is the recognition of the work, domestic work as work, and the permit to work. So maybe you can give us some insights about these two major goals of the migrant domestic workers. Who wants to start first?
Start with Jessica?
Okay, we can start with Jessica.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak from home, so I can still join you, but my daughter can be asleep in her room downstairs. So thank you again. Well, talking about the two goals of the migrant domestic workers, I as a policy advisor work on the Household Services Act, de Regeling Dienstverlening aan Huis. And I think it's one of the first steps to get the work recognized. As Joy mentioned, it has been 11 years ago since the ILO convention, agreement was reached on the ILO convention, and we still need a lot of work to do in the Netherlands. We don't have any formalized form of domestic work or work around the household in the Netherlands, and we really need to have that. At the same time, I do see a bit of a risk at the moment when we formalize domestic work, when workers working around the household will have access to social protection and to the minimum wage, etc. Well, there might be a risk for migrant domestic workers doing the work right now. So I think step two, we need to link the two goals together, I think, to get to a social standard that's acceptable for all.
May I May I add, so we were discussing, I think, a very relevant case from the European Court of Justice, a Spanish case. Jessica, you, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. I was quite, well, I liked it because it says that the discrimination, and that's actually what we're talking about this week, between domestic work and other workers is not justified. And the Spanish government said, no, but we have to treat domestic workers differently because otherwise it will become illegal labor. And the court said, sorry, that argument could go for any job, and why are you using the argument only for women's job? At least we all know that some 90% probably is. So I thought that, is that something, Jessica, that FNV is going to use, or see if we can somehow use such a
I
case
think,
in the Dutch?
I think I'm sorry. I would really like to study that case more closely, because I think it's a very interesting one. And the case for discrimination is in the Netherlands very valid as well. The CEDAW committee, the Commission on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, has ruled a decade ago that the Household Services Act is in fact discriminating against women. But so far that has not changed the Dutch government's position on the Household Services Act. And I hope that the next government, the new government, will change their position. I hope they have to, because also there's been a case in the Rotterdam court on the same act, the Household Services Act, but it's in care. And that court has ruled also that the Household Services Act is discriminating against women. So I hope that there will be a change on the Dutch position, and that they will ratify ILO Convention 189, because it's the current situation is discriminating, but at the same time I think we have to take it a step further as well. But I think we have a great panel here tonight to discuss that any further.
So when we talk about discrimination that is discriminating to women, but what, from my understanding, being involved in the union for so many years, since 2013, when we were still talking about the recommendation and the research that is being done by Carlsberg Committee, and then this ratification call to recognize domestic work as work. First, of course, the dilemma of the undocumented background domestic workers here is that if you would recognize ILO 189, where are we going to put ourselves in there? Is it only for the documented who are in the domestic work sector, or does it also include us? Because by definition, we are domestic workers, although we just don't have work permit. That is why the second goal of the campaign is work permit for those who are already here. So how can we work on that? What is the next step to be done? Who needs to be involved in doing the recognition? Because if you will just stick in the policy alone, like, okay, we are just waiting for the recognition of domestic work as work, some people think that it is a competition. Like, how about us? We are working here legally. You are undocumented here, and then you want equal rights just like us. It's not about that, right? So this is more on recognizing those who are already here working and contributing to the society. So there's a lot of stumbling blocks in putting this issue all together for the benefit of the undocumented domestic workers. So how can we move forward on the campaigns and all the experiments, the researches that we have been doing all throughout the years?
You want me to respond to that? I think
Please do
we
so,
said that I
ma'am.
would respond to it.
Yes.
And I totally agree when you sort of cite like all the research and all the talk and all the, and also here at Pakhuis and with the people present here, we've gone over it again and again, and yet it's very difficult to find the way in to change things. I think, Joy, you mentioned human dignity. For me, that is the starting point. It is Article 1 of a lot of constitutions worldwide. Human dignity is what we start from. Respect is what you also mentioned. So I think these are but human dignity is as a constitutional right for all of us. It doesn't say that you have to have a legal status, yes or no, to be entitled to human dignity. If I then, Marion, in your introduction, you say that there's so many countries in Europe doing regularizations. Ireland saying 4 years, and if you have kids, 3 years. We all know that Italy and Spain, they regularly do regularizations. On that road, I would say it is something for the European Commission to pick up on. If there is such a reality in Europe that people are working on European labor markets, working in sectors, we're talking about domestic work right now, but there's, of course, if you look at agriculture, for instance, there was this riot about the Italian tomatoes that we are eating. So it is a European market, so and it calls for European attention and approach. So I would say eventually a European directive on regularizations, which says these are the minimum conditions. Everybody has to do a regularization once in a while, and if you're not doing it, you have to come with really good motivation why you're not regularizing, because we don't believe that you will not have any people without a residence permit working within your borders. It's if you can motivate that you really don't have anybody, maybe you can be exempted from a regularization, but that's highly unlikely. And there's this weird thing in the whole system, and this is something that in part is addressed in EU law, and this Spanish case, although it doesn't say who the workers were, whether the workers had a residence permit, yes or no, but what we see is access to legal employment is not granted for low-waged work, yet you are workers. You have the rights of workers. So this is really strange. And the only explanation I have that we keep this dualness is that it benefits the economy. So it's really economy against dignity. Now, right now we have an all-time high demand of workers or low of unemployment. I think next week our Ukrainian guests will be allowed to work in the Netherlands, while this had been impossible for asylum seekers and still will be impossible for asylum seekers. So sometimes something can happen. Crises can help. So the question is, do we need to position it as a crisis? I would hope not, because I think after COVID and now after this war, we've sort of done with crises if at all possible. But this economic argumentation against the human dignity, I think that, and what we just heard another session with a high level of socialist and green power in the city of Amsterdam, that might mean that dignity could prevail over the economic argument to keep this weird duality. Yet a city cannot do everything, because residence permits are not given by a city, but are given at the national level, unless of course this European, that would be a nice one, if this European directive on regularizations would give the right to regularize to cities and not necessarily to nation states. You already often see cities and Europe communicate, and the national is sort of outside. So that would be an innovation in policy, truly. So no solution there, but I do see some building blocks to go to. Yeah, let's see if the others want to respond to that first, or if there's questions on these ideas first.
Yeah, I want to raise a next question. So what is happening around? Because just last week, when we have presented our position regarding the recognition of the undocumented, as we are trying to create on a city level a discrimination and racism free city, the response of the two candidates were really so heartbreaking. It's like, yeah, we're giving housing to refugees. That's not what we want. We don't want first beholden to anyone for refuge, because we are working here. We have been contributing to the society, to the economy for so many years. So we want, like, yeah, just tax us. That's just what I said. So, and so that we can also have the rights to pay for our healthcare provision. So
Mariana, it's actually a really nice one. I said economic versus dignity, but you're actually saying no, that's nonsense. It's economic and economic, because there's an economic benefit to regularizing you by letting you pay tax, etc. So there's economic arguments at both ends of the story. Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
So now I would like to hear, because based on the recommendation of the Office of the Ombudsman, working on formalizing the informal. So why did the Ombudsman recommended this? Why? What does the Ombudsman see? Why do we need to formalize the informal? So maybe Fatima, you can answer that.
Yes.
What does it mean by that? Work on formalizing the informal.
It's like making what's invisible visible and make it formal to create in a big dream equal rights for the people who are working here in the informal sector, if it's the right word in English. I'm not sure. But when we advise that, it's something we saw that there is a gap between the system world and the living world, and the gap is for, actually, if I'm correct, the undocumented people are like a black hole. It's not easy to get out of it, and it's also undermining the legal system, the current situation, and also a high risk for exploitation on several levels for undocumented people. And it's our role as an ombudsman to address that. And what we also saw is that this specific situation, the law hasn't been changed for years, while society is developing over years. Undocumented people can be part of the society, can work here, can live here, can pay high costs for living, such as rent, but they are not actually a part of society. They're not. They're excluded for several voorzieningen. How do you say it in English? Services. Yeah. And what our role is to address it, to make a report about, do recommendations, and sometimes it's not according to what's according to the law. It's against the law. So, such as the report stated in for the ombudsman for students, giving them equal rights for the students who are here in Amsterdam, and also for the workers. There has to be some kind of conversation talking about it. We can talk about it with four of us, but it has to go forward to the municipality and higher to the national level, and maybe what you said, that's also on European level. If there is a change, that's great. If it's good start.
I'm just interested because we have Office of the Ombudsman for Amsterdam, and making such recommendation for policymakers. So what would happen if, say, the candidate or the majority of the council, well, of course I know that they have to vote, majority has to agree on that, but if they would just keep the recommendation at bay, and they would just say, oh, we just cannot get the majority of the votes. what is the next step to do then? I mean, because I just have an impression that there is like lack of political will to really push through on the changes based also on the recommendation of the Office of the Ombudsman. So what's going to happen next?
I wish I could change it, but it's also when we do our research and have conversation, it will take time. But maybe sometimes you need to have another strategy, to look into other solutions. So what we saw in the last meeting with City ID, how it went in with New York and San Francisco. You have to try it, even though if there is no, if it looks like there's no political willing. Not trying is not changing. So try to get a collaboration, like what it happened with the students for the undocumented for university and also the hogescholen. Eventually, it came to a covenant, so it made it possible. So I think talking about it, but also trying new ideas, will eventually come to something new. But doing nothing, it will not change. Definitely not. Definitely not. And this is my role. I'm addressing it. I'm talking about it with you. And when we are part of it, we will try to have conversation with policymakers, etc. We will do that, but it has to be on several levels. And pointing and getting it together, and also the intention. I think it will maybe eventually we'll start to have changes. Like it's not that I want to compare it with it, but the kinderopvangtoeslagaffaire, eventually it changed it. So the attention is very important and the right moment, but also keep addressing it.
And maybe if I may, on action, ask a question to Jessica also, and or maybe the audience, because so this Spanish case is an example of legal action. The toeslagenaffaire is also came through legal action, and then judges realizing that they've been blind for years and changing their stance. My colleague Paul Minderhout did his lecture on the Koppelingswet and how that, the Linking Act, how that is really putting people outside the formal, even Dutch people, with a partner without legal status. And all of these things come to fore through legal action. A lot of case law, and it takes a lot of time and work and effort, and it's not always successful. But a question to Jessica, is that on the FNV strategy to take some of these cases to court eventually?
Yes, it is part of our strategy to abolish the Household Services Act, the Regeling Dienstverlening aan Huis. Yes, it definitely is, but it's quite difficult. It takes a lot of years. We have done a few court cases in the past. For example, on the sick Alpha Help, a care worker, who's also working on the Household Services Act. And she actually didn't know she was working on it. She thought she was employed, but she wasn't. And also, for example, platforms helping, for example, use the Household Services Act to avoid employing workers. So it in that respect, it definitely is. And also, Bureau Clara Wichman, who has started the case against the PGB worker, or not against the PGB worker, but for the PGB worker last December. I believe they are studying the case as well to see if it applies to a lot more workers than just the one they did the law case for. So yes, it definitely is part of our strategy. But as I said, I only work on the Household Services Act and not on the bigger issue I think we're talking about here this evening as well.
And I guess that we were just chatting on your work, and I keep wondering what would happen if all the employers of domestic workers would, like, together in one big box file an application for work permits for their domestic workers. It would be, how many applications would it be from the city of Amsterdam? Some thousands more?
Perhaps because, but the thing is, employers are also aware that if they would be reported or somebody from the authorities would know that they are employing an undocumented worker, the policy, the national policy is focusing on penalizing those who hire undocumented. So even if they want to fight for their undocumented workers, they couldn't. For them, okay, the only compensation or the benefits or the good thing that I can do for you is, you would have sick leave. It depends on the agreement between the employer and the employees. It's always like that. But if you would encounter, some employers would pretend that, you are a self-employed worker, so I pay you by the number of hours when you work. Now, if you don't work, I would not pay you. But that is not the case of the undocumented workers. It's always like we are at the mercy of our employers. So what we are asking is, from the recommendation, the Office of the Ombudsman have already recommended that work on formalizing the informal, regularize it. I mean, I have an experience because my employer, who is not Dutch, when I accepted the job, they already gave me all the benefits that they think that would be good for me. Like, okay, this is your hourly rate, and we will give you a 25 paid holiday for 1 year based on the calculation of the number of hours that you render per week, by number of months, weeks. I don't know the calculation, I'm not good in math. So I was just like, okay, let it be. How much is it? Then like, since you are working 35 hours per week, that would be 75 euros per day. So I was like, 75 euros times 25. So that was that. Well, not everyone would have a very fair and considerate employer like some of us have. Most of the stories that we are getting or that we heard from undocumented migrants are so heartbreaking that they would just, I'm just staying at my work because I don't have any replacement job. So for like 10 years they are cleaning the house, wherein the rate now is like say 15 euros per hour, but they are still being paid 10 euros per hour, and we were like, why are you accepting that job? So there is no regular laws about it. I mean,
that's the thing. There is. That is where there's a. That's what I said at the beginning. That's the weird thing. You have no right to formal employment, but you are a worker and you have the rights of a worker. So you have a right to equal pay, and you even under the contested regeling, you have a right to holiday money and to sick leave, paid sick leave. So claiming those rights, even if you're undocumented, could be a possibility. But then of course there's the
employers are not aware of that. It's like they're
so then we need to inform the employers. So then that's the next. So there's I spoke of Europe, of national policies. That's a policy angle. If you can't change the policy, then look at the work. What can you improve on the work end? And then informing employers of their obligations. And they might not get fees from the labor inspection, but they can be taken to court by the domestic workers saying, I might not have papers in migration law, but I am a worker and I have rights as a worker. And those can be claimed. And that there's EU law to support it. If you cannot prove that you've been working there, EU law says you've been working there for 3 months. Dutch law says you've been working there for 6 months. You don't have to prove it. The burden of proof is changed around. The law has helped you. You can say 6 months I've been working there. Say, the collective labor agreement, this is the income, so that's what I'm entitled to. I've worked 8 hours.
But it's not that easy. I
It's
mean.
not easy. No,
And also,
none of
you're
these
going to
ways.
lose your job, and that's the risk of an undocumented, because finding another job is very harder, and also they can get een WW-uitkering. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it.
But that's a
something like
question.
that.
That's a question if they can't.
But even
The
though
Spanish
fighting
case
for that,
is about. I know. So
Yeah,
legal
so that-
activism is you really need to be up to it. But
it's more than that. I think it's also the recognition, being recognized as a worker.
can Marijke say something about it?
Yeah,
It's your-
I would also like to
Yeah.
hear from the audience because, yeah, it's getting interesting with the, with the discussion.
I like this
Very
part
good.
very much, but some of you know that I really would like to work also with employers, the good ones. And I know, Marion Grace, what you said is that they have to fear fines, so they are not easily to step out because they can get 4,000, and that has been done. But you can build that up in another way in which they don't first come out, but find each other, set standards. We think this and that should be done, because we know there are employers who are on the side of domestic workers, at least who might be. And we know in universities, and I've been asking around the last period, there are many people on universities working and having someone who cleans their house and who might be willing to say, okay, I am in favor of standards. There are feminist groups, there are many women who know about the whole history about doing homework, housework, and so you can get coalitions, and you don't have to get the risk of the employers immediately going alone out and say, I have, but you can build out coalitions. I liked your idea to say, let 100 employers say, hey, we are going to do an application in the EU markets, and we cannot find someone else than the domestic worker who is working for us. I mean, you must be creative, but we should explore this further, and we have some ideas to share, so please come. But Jessica, you also said something, and that's interesting, and I know Clara Wichmann has also ended a report. If you do have the ILO, if you do have the work formalized, the work as such, then for the undocumented, there may be a risk that they are spit out of the labor market, because you can get social security and then there might be more decision. And you said you should work on the two goals together at the same time. We should find, so that you cannot first do that and then kick out the undocumented, but then you say domestic workers, these are the domestic workers. These, and some have papers, some don't. And for all we want a dignified and respectful solution. And we are going to do that. So I feel, because I follow the discussions, and sometimes, should we do first this or should we do first that? But it has to be together, and it has to be with the living people you are. And in the circumstances and with the solidarity we can find, we have to be creative, and you have many allies. Sorry, I'm
No, it's, I mean, let's do it.
So, anything who wants to ask our panelists, or some reaction or insights? Maybe, yeah, Annette?
Hello, Annette. Good evening. Thank you very much for organizing this evening. Yeah, I think that this ILO convention sounds very complicated to me, because on the one hand, yeah, we're supposed to fight for it, but then indeed, what is then the benefit for domestic workers, we don't know. So I really would like to propose to look on different ways to it, building coalitions indeed with employers, and also really fight for the right to work, being recognized as a person that's working here.
Particularly the undocumented.
Yes,
Who have been
yes.
here, like the old people, I mean, they're already in their 50s or in their 60s, they're still undocumented. they cannot go back to they can go back to their country of origin, but refuse not to because way back home they know that they don't have employment, they
Yeah.
don't have jobs.
Yeah.
That is why, of course, we also demand our own countries to, hey, provide jobs for us so that we don't have to leave our families behind just to survive, just to have a to gamble for a better living condition, for a better life for our
Yeah,
children.
but if you could work on maybe also think about temporary work, what they also do in Italy, then people can also visit their, their children back home, and everybody will be more healthy and more happier, in
Exactly.
as a society. And
Yes, many of us have already loved ones who have died, and we cannot go
Yes.
back. We cannot mourn. We cannot pay our last respect because it is always like the economic issue of having work and not having money when we go back home. Or we will just grieve in silence and pray for our departed loved ones that may they rest in peace.
Yeah,
A
so-
lot of us like lost their parents, their sisters, worse, they lost their own children. They just refuse to come back because they know, okay, our lives should move on. But we have things to be done. We have to work, and this is the survival thing.
So yeah, I mean, you work here, you're part of the economic system, so I think you should definitely be recognized in what you do. And and I also think it's something that a lot of people should be more aware about, that you work here, you live here, you don't leave for a reason, and you should not be exploited, as a lot of women are going
Thank you
through
for
now.
that
Yeah,
word.
so, I mean,
Exploited
yeah, you
is a good keyword too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we spoke about the exploitation-free city. I mean, it's not, we don't want people to be exploited here. And
Thank
that's
you,
happening. So yeah, I think you should really build a sports coalition and work towards a strong message with a lot of people.
And I'll look at Maite first. Maite?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Maite Ledesma, and also with the Migrant Domestic Workers Union and with the International Migrants Alliance. I think that we're all here because we agree that there is compelling reason to formalize the informal, as Jessica said, to recognize domestic workers' work, to recognize the basic rights of a growing number of, the voiceless and the faceless, and the rightsless community in Dutch society. And I think that we are also aware that Dutch society, the Dutch government have really been remiss in terms of, living true to their avowed values of transparency, equality, so on and so forth, So I think what really needs to happen now, and I was listening earlier to the discussion on the city ID. The city ID is a step towards recognition. It's a step towards addressing the problem of exclusions of, vulnerable communities within Dutch society. And like the FNB has also committed to this, ensuring that this process of recognizing domestic workers' work is moved forward. But I think what also needs to be done is that, in the rights movement historically, rights have never been given to oppressed peoples on a silver platter. So likewise here, I think that the voices of those who are most affected really needs to be stronger. And from these voices, to really extend the network of solidarity, because there are a lot of sectors in Dutch society that are already aware of the problem, but that, there has to be an impetus in terms of moving forward with this long-running situation and long-running problem. And I think that's what you said about, looking at all the possible arenas where we can bring these voices to have an impact, whether it's with the European Commission, where we can put a case forward, with national governments, with the municipalities now, especially after the elections. I mean, we really should look at, the opportunities there for, having a more proactive, decisive move in terms of recognizing these rights for vulnerable communities. And I'm not only speaking of the undocumented. I'm speaking of refugees. I'm speaking of displaced peoples, the homeless. So there are and learning also from the CTID experience of New York and San Francisco, where they had a very effective, network of all the affected communities. I think is a very important step in terms of ensuring that, this campaign moves forward. And I think that, the Migrant Domestic Workers Union has a role to play in that, but also other players that are like the Amsterdam City Rights, City Rights United, and all these other groups that are doing fantastic work on the ground. But we need to come together, to have a common ground for, saying, this is what we want, this is where we want to go, these are the people that we need to involve. So I think that has to happen now, because it's been too long, and there are, this problem will continue, it will only continue, it will, there is no end to this. Now it's Ukraine, I don't know next week what other country will have refugees coming in again. So there has to be policies in place, nationally, Europe-wide, municipality level, that will ensure that the rights of people are protected, and for those who are most vulnerable.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that very wonderful wrapping up. You actually, yes.
It's not a wrapping up, it's an invitation
Yes.
actually for a follow-up meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And if I just may, I think what is very true you say is the call for action, but also if you look at all the civil rights movements, all the cases that have been, it is people putting their life on the line. So saying people fear to lose their jobs, well, maybe at some point that moment is here to say, okay, then I lose my job, but we have to take some action. And of course there will be other jobs, I think, in the network, if people say, okay, let's stand up in that way. Because I really don't, yeah.
But there's more for our society. I mean, I agree that you as workers have to fight for your rights or whatever, but who am I to say that? We have a full society, and it's about exclusion, and it's about, how you call it, minachting, or this, I don't know, disrespect. And I feel that's all ours. So we have to stretch out within our society. I mean, it's a responsibility for us all to reach out. So it's not only about the workers to take the risks, but we all have to do our best to connect. And let's make more plans together, at least, because there are more possibilities that are not used yet properly, I feel. And we should be creative and sit together and use our own, like you do, all our own contacts and own creativity. I feel there's more to win. There's much respect also in the society for you. I mean, that is there to win, and that has to be.
Okay, so one more last question, because I saw one from our audience before I give the floor to Joy for all the reactions.
Hi, my name is Franny. I'm working at Fair Work. I've been working with you as well. And I was wondering regarding the question about temporary permits and the legal pathways of migration. Is that also an issue that you try to bring across? To bring across, and is there more political commitment for those kinds of pathways for migration or temporary permits, because there's obviously a lack, and I know that there has been more and more discussion about those kinds of regulations, so I wonder if how the panel sees this. Joy.
Because one of the campaigns, the work for me, because I remember one time when I talked to my employer, he said one of the reasons why there's no amnesty because after 3 years you will have permanent residence. So the working permit that we are promoting now is not to have permanent residence, but for us to have to work here legally.
Yeah.
I mean, just like in Asia, we have a worker permit of 5 years or 10 years, but I mean, our focus is not to be permanent here because we want to go back home.
It's EU law. If you're here for 5 years, you have permanent
Yeah,
residence,
exactly.
or at least you're entitled to it.
Yes.
So you can not distance yourself from that, and we cannot take it from you if you are here on a permanent job with a status that allows for permanence. If your example is more of a 2 year, maybe 2 year in, half year out, 2 year, that's the typical circular migration models that are being discussed as options. I've always thought it would not necessarily be an option for Amsterdam domestic workers because you want to be regularized, you want to have a status, you want to travel home, but then you want to return here for your job and not have to stay away for half a year and then come back and never build up any rights, because then you always stay a temporary migrant worker. And yeah, if it's a permanent job, then why have a temporary right?
Because they said, my employer said that's one of the reasons why you don't have the amnesty. We don't want to, for you to, it will be a lot of migrants, people here, if we give you the amnesty, and after 5 years, we will have thousands of migrants coming here, and then another amnesty, and then Netherlands is so small. My employer said, where we're going, I mean, it will be, how we call it, crowded if we allow immigrants or migrants to have a permanent residence.
Like Netherlands is the center of the world or the universe? Is that what you're saying?
But we're
Wow.
discussing regularization of the people that are already here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Exactly.
But these are the people that
Yeah.
keep coming here.
No,
It's on the top, in the middle.
I don't know, center of the world or center of the universe, I'm not really sure of that. But yeah, that is also the same reaction that when I ask, what do you think about undocumented migrant workers here, giving them their recognition and their permit to work and stay, and then I go, no, if we do that, and I heard this from a lawyer. No, I think if we do that, a lot of migrants would go to the Netherlands to work here, like, okay.
I just wanted to follow up on what Tessa was saying, that, there are expats, you have to remember. And these are people with jobs. And when they have jobs and the jobs are permanent, they get the permit to stay. So why not the domestic worker who has a permanent job? Why is she less qualified? Because her job is domestic work?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the core issue.
Mm-hmm.
The discriminatory and how they look at this domestic work as women's work, as low paid jobs, then they are not allowed to have the status of an expat. Then we are simply migrant workers. We are not expats.
It's the high skilled jobs
Yes.
or high wage jobs,
Exactly.
not necessarily need much skills for, but high waged are
They
call it expats,
Yeah.
and the
Yes.
low waged, for
Yeah.
which you need a lot of skills,
True.
are called migrants or labor migrants, and
Economic migrants.
it is a division on the labor market that
Exactly.
is I mean,
Yes.
as the week of discrimination, it is one of the core socio-economic status
And I think
discriminations.
that this has to be exposed for what it really
The
is.
decision of the European Code of Spanish case, which you talked about,
Mhm.
may have effect.
I think it's a very interesting case. I think it could really, put a hold to some of the justifications for the unequal treatment that we see for typical low-waged women jobs, excluding them from social benefits when other jobs where you could just as well have the risk of exploitation. I mean, Indian ICT people who are doing a lot of programming are not necessarily not exploited. It's just in a different setting.
Yeah.
But how do you affect this decision?
It's EU law, so you have to see whether there's similar rules in the Netherlands that need to be changed, because the EU court said that now we have to interpret the law according to their ruling. Of course, national governments who don't like to change, don't like to see that they have to change, they'll say that they don't have to change. And then you wait for a national court to say, no, you do have to change because the European court has said so. So it like I said, it takes time, and you need to challenge these decisions. If you don't challenge, then in the end, however much I'm with Marijke on everything else that we can do, I do believe that some legal activism is required.
And I feel also if you puzzle a bit more about the meaning of what it means that it goes together, the disrespect for these kinds of work and the not acknowledgement of the work the migrants do. I mean, if you work it out better, so you can really understand that it's the same. It's looking in the mirror in a way that, I mean, I come from The Hague, and there has been 30 years, 20 till 25% of the work in the greenhouses next to the city was done by undocumented migrants. But also the migrants who come from the EU countries or the Dutch workers there are not really respected. I mean, there was an overcome, and you see it with domestic work too. There's no respect for this work and for the sectors, and that I think there are also other people who can understand this, the fact that you have to respect this work also in the other sectors. So undocumented workers it's not they are working, it's the work that's not respected, and the workers, sorry, I need more, but we have to, you must find language for that to really connect also, because the Koppelingswet came in on the 1st of July in 1998. So the workers could not pay taxes, the undocumented could not pay taxes on premise anymore. On the same day, there was another law which made time agency bureaus didn't need a permit anymore. So there was a booming business suddenly in the greenhouses with disrespected Dutch workers. I mean, the one system working with undocumented workers was replaced by another complete flexibility, 3 workers for the price for 2 works. So there is a relation. Sorry, I'm going flying, but I feel we should work it out better, and we can tell more stories than only ratify C189. That must have more life and more stories and more understanding. That's my feeling. Huh? It's
sometimes
too
think
abstract
it's
sometimes.
too complicated to explain.
Yeah.
Because okay, you ratify, but still you don't know if it's going to be okay for the undocumented.
And you want respect. If the respect is, sorry.
All right, so much things to ponder tonight, hearing from the perspective of our panelists, from the audience also. Thank you so much for engaging in this conversation, in this issue that's pressing, especially for the undocumented migrant domestic workers, not only in Amsterdam, but also in the whole Netherlands. So before wrapping it up, so any positive steps forward, your reaction based on what, as a Vice President of FNV MDW, so what can you...
I really appreciate it that, you are helping us with our campaign with the 2 long-term goals. It's really important that you're supporting us. But as I appreciate that we are focused on two long-term goals, I also want to emphasize the short-term goals and also the situations of undocumented right now, especially during pandemic. We are always talking about, even undocumented, you have labor rights. But being undocumented, we cannot practice those labor rights. So I just want to, if you have any suggestions, ideas, what can we address in the situations that undocumented is currently experiencing right now? In this pandemic, we lost job, we lost income, right? And is there in the labor law, because it keeps popping in my mind, that we can sue the employers asking for termination payment? Or it will, if we do that, it will be an access for us to be deported as well. So there are many people asking, it's just they're working 15 years, some is 25 years, and this pandemic said, sorry, we have to cut our costs, so we don't need you anymore. So, and she's working with one employer for 20 years, and then it's like a bomb. So you see, she told me, is there anything I can do? And well, they said, you have labor rights, but I'm undocumented. Is there, I mean, yeah, they said you can sue the employer, but the reality is, we will also be a negative for us on these situations. This pandemic is really like, it really put us in a very low situations. We are the most vulnerable in this crisis, especially now that they always said that Filipinos are very expensive. So yeah, you should show no work, no pay. Even we said, but we have a labor right. Yeah, but you are documented, we don't have contract, something like that. So I want also to, not just the long-term goal, but also looking the situations of undocumented right now. What can we address for them? Because many undocumented are losing their morale, losing their hope, they got depressed as well. And what we need is also, I will call it a support, not only for the long-term goals, but also support that we can also have, how do you call it? We fight for it, we fight for our rights, but we need somebody to back us up. And how are we going to do it? So that's why we need all the experts, we need all the organizations, individuals. So, because we are vulnerable, and it's really concerned to me that the situations of undocumented right now, if you see many people already lost houses because they cannot pay the rent, and they cannot file complaint to the employers. And they said, if you file a case, then you will be deported. So where are we stand? What shall we do? So that's, I think, that's really what keep popping on our mind. Yeah, thank you.
Tonight, it's a wonderful, it's a very fruitful discussion that we heard from everyone here in the studio, and I know that there are audience or viewers who also have a lot of questions in their mind, but please feel free to get in touch with us, and if you would look at the program, you can contact our Vice President, Joy Escanio, or you can ask Backpack House as well. Maybe you can also provide us your website, or what is the website of the migrant domestic workers? Maybe you can mention that.
What was the website?
Midowork2020.org.
But we do have the domestic workers Facebook and Twitter, so.
Well, the website is midowork2020.org. So that is where you can find everything about the campaigns of the migrant domestic workers within FNB. Thank you so much for this very engaging All right. Yes.
Can we say goodbye to Jessica?
Oh, Jessica, I'm sorry. Jessica, I'm sorry.